going. Okay. So, usually, I guess let me just start off with today is October 17th, 2015. This is Moisés Acuña-Gurrola with the Latino Americans 500 Years of History Oral History Project. Thank you for coming in and bringing in all this material. Usually what we do is sort of start with some background information and that sort of thing, but there's just so much that you're bringing in that I would like to go ahead and just kind of jump ahead. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about your background growing up, parents, birthday?
Okay, my name is Michael Gonzales, Michael Anthony Gonzales, and I was born in Riverside, California, a little community called Casablanca. And at the age of 8, our family moved to Los Angeles. And so I grew up there in a little community in East Los Angeles called Boyle Heights. It is predominantly a Latino community. And we were surrounded really with a lot of gang activity. So I escaped all that somehow miraculously, you know. That was an interesting experience to go through that and survive it. So eventually I joined the military in 1960 out of high school. I went to Cathedral High School, an all-boys Catholic school. And from there I joined the Air Force, Air National Guard at the time, and went to Air Force training in Biloxi, Mississippi after my basic training in San Antonio, where I studied, in Biloxi, I studied radar electronics training for about 40 weeks. After a period of time, I was invited to come to Fort Worth, Texas with Latino Industries. I was working for this aerospace firm that manufactured guidance and control systems for the F-111. It was also manufacturing the bombing computer for that aircraft. I came as a tech rep in 1969, and I was working here in the General Dynamics facility for 2 years, and then our contract ended, so I returned back to California where they laid me off, but I was at that time able to return to Fort Worth, and because I had a position offered to me by the Social Security Administration of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare.
Okay.
And we grew up here, the kids grew up here in Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay. What year were you born? Or
1942, June 27, 1942.
Okay. And you got here back when you worked for the Social Security Administration?
Well, I came with Latino Industries in 1969.
Right.
Worked there 2 years with them, and then I joined the Social Security Administration in Fort Worth here.
Okay. And what year was that?
1971.
71. Okay.
Did you ask about my parents too, or?
Yes. Their names, where
Okay.
they're from?
My father is Francisco Frank Gonzales, and my mother is Guillermina Ayala. We called her Minnie. And my grandparents, my paternal grandparents are Ramon Gonzales and Eulogia Calleros. And my maternal grandparents are Rosario Ayala and Adelaida Zamora. They're from Mexico.
When did they come over?
1914, during the Agrarian Revolution in Mexico with Pancho Villa and Zapata and federal government. They were escaping that turmoil that was going on in that country during that period of time. Mm-hmm. And my great-grandfather, Victor Gonzales, organized our family, 8 sons and daughters and their families, to come to the United States in 1914-15. And they crossed over in 1915 to enter New Mexico, where they tried farming, but they had a drought that year that they came, so they lost everything. Then they went up to Magdalena, New Mexico, where my father was born, where the family worked in the silver mines there, which is what they were familiar with in Old Mexico and Zacatecas, right. The silver mines there. So that's where my father was born, in Magdalena, New Mexico in 1917. Our family then left New Mexico in 1918 in the spring to make their way to California, and that's where eventually I was born in 1942.
Okay. This is usually the part we start talking, like going into school and that sort of thing. But let's jump ahead a little bit to '71, and or better yet, how did you get the job working from a private company to the Social Security Administration?
Well, that's a very good lead-in to what we're trying to accomplish here, and that's how the Latino connection works.
Okay.
As you know, a lot of things happen because of somebody having inside knowledge or influence, especially in the hiring capacity. I was going to TCU during that period of time, and a good friend of mine, Rafael San Juan, was also a student there, and he was working on his master's in Spanish, and I was working on my bachelor's in Spanish and French. And Rafael invited me to take the Federal Service Entrance Examination that was coming up because he had to take it to go to, he was going to enter into HUD, H-U-D, Housing and Urban Development. And he invited me to take the entrance examination with him, and I declined at first because I had a job with Lytton. But little did I know, my job was coming to a close because the aerospace industry was falling apart during that period of time. So I reluctantly agreed to take the examination, not that I needed it because I still wasn't working, but I'm glad I did because it was a result. I got picked up by the Federal Service for an interview in the Social Security here in downtown Fort Worth. Mr. O'Neill called me and wanted to chat with me about employment with the federal government. Well, I first declined his offer because I didn't know what kind of work it was, but then when I found out I was getting laid off, I called him back and I said, Mr. O'Neill, I'd like to pursue that interview with you. So I met him, and he liked me and referred me to a committee interview in Dallas where they had managers that were interviewing potential employees. And one of the employees there was a member of the Social Security Hispanic Employees Organization. And I was very well recruited by him. They could see that I could add something of value to the agency, so he actively was helping me by looking to see what opportunities there were and then recruiting me. Mm-hmm. So it was that was my first exposure to a helping hand from a fellow Hispanic in the federal government, and that was in 1971.
Okay. And so, what did your job duties include? Did you go straight into working with the community and?
Well, I started first of all by going to training. Once they hired me, they wanted me to train in the Social Security laws. And also at the time, the Medicaid laws that came into existence. There's 2 volumes of law. So I went to, I think it was a 9 or 11-week training course in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And from there, my first duty station was Las Cruces, New Mexico. So from 1971 to 74, I worked in Las Cruces, New Mexico, assisting people with their retirement claims, disability claims, educational benefits for survivors, and so on. So my strong point there was that I was able to help people in the Spanish language because there were few interpreters that were available, and I knew the languages, so they really liked that feature about me, and so I was able to work in Social Security pretty much until 1977, all the time being able to help people that are Spanish-speaking only. So that was in 1974 when I left Las Cruces to come to Dallas because I needed to finish up my BA at TCU because I was going to school part-time. So they allowed me to come back, and that's when I completed my undergrad there at TCU in 1975, but I received my diploma in 1977 because I didn't have enough money to pay all the expenses before I graduated. Yeah.
And you went to USC.
Yes. Yeah. That was in 1980. I was then working for the Office for Civil Rights in Dallas, the Department of Health. It went from Health, Education, and Welfare to the Health and Human Services. That's when they made that transition in that period of time. And Patricia Harris was the secretary of HHS at that time, or HEW, could be during that transition period. Well, during that period, they announced an opportunity for an advanced degree, a graduate degree in public administration, because they were looking for individuals, minority individuals, to move into management positions. So they put out this announcement, and I bid on it along with a lot of other people. But I was one of 13 federal employees nationwide that was selected for that position. So they sent me to Washington, D.C. I took my family with us, and I went to the USC campus in Washington, D.C. in their School of Public Administration, and completed the master's program in 13 months.
Huh.
And when I returned back, I went up with Secretary Harris's blessings, but then the administration changed, and we had President Reagan came in, and the Republicans came in, and when I returned back to Dallas, the people that set me up there were no longer in control, so the Republicans that were here didn't know who I was and didn't care who I was, so I went back to my regular job.
Yeah.
So I didn't go into management at that point
Okay.
until later in other agencies.
Okay. So I want to know, I guess, which was one of the first organizations? Was the Community Action Agency before?
Yes.
Okay. How did you get? Is this one of the first sort of these types of community programs, community organizations that you got involved with?
It was, and it was almost concurrent, because this was in '75, this was in '76. But I started actively being on. I served at the board of directors for the Community Action Agency in the Tarrant County area. Rhonda Doyle was our president of the committee, and Eddie Herrera was the director of the Community Action Agency at that time.
Eddie Herrera, I know the name for some reason.
Yeah, he was a very, very involved community leader back in the early '70s in Fort Worth.
Okay. So there's a few different ways we can go here. I guess I'll just ask about organizations here that you either knew of or maybe had some involvement in. Were the Brown Berets, for example, really prominent here in Fort Worth?
I don't recall any Brown Beret movement in the area. But I did get involved with Image.
Mm-hmm.
Image initially was a Mexican American organization, and the acronym Image was involved Mexican American Government Employees, IMAGE. And after the movement became very strong across the United States, they dropped the acronym, and Image was just a organization of Hispanic government employees, not Mexican American anymore, because we had now a broader base of Hispanics across the country, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, we were very involved with community activity that was going on, and I think it was concurrent to this, because I was serving on the board dealing with the issues that related to the Community Action Agency, but in the community I was actually a civil rights activist in the area here. And our organization dealt with such things as a suit against the Carswell Air Force Base for underrepresentation of Hispanic employees. We also did a great study during the period that I was the president, and it was a great study on the condition of the Fort Worth ISD schools, especially comparing the poor areas, the north side area, to the south side area. Mm-hmm. And we made presented a paper to the school board, which I was able to, I was asked to present it on behalf of the organization. And it talked about all the ills that we thought existed in the Fort Worth ISD. that needed to be attended to if we were going to have equal education opportunities for Latinos in Fort Worth. It was created quite a stir, and that was the impetus for a lot of change going on during that time. There was also a lawsuit that was presented by Rufino Mendoza. I don't know if you've heard of that name.
Possibly.
Yeah. He filed a suit against the Fort Worth ISD for there were a lot of issues in there, but mainly equality of education. Excuse me. And there was a suit that had been running for years. Rufino Mendoza, the family of Rufino Mendoza was very active in the community. His sons were very proactive in civil rights issues here, as well as one of his sons became the police chief here in Fort Worth, and others were in the city of Fort Worth, Human Relations Commission, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Very, very powerful Fort Worth family back in the 70s.
Yeah, I guess the reason I had asked about Brown Berets, because I know they were active in Dallas, and I know in other parts of Texas they were, I guess, competing a lot for federal dollars with, say, LULAC. SAD was one of them, and I was just kind of wondering if there was tension here among.
No, not that I recall.
Okay.
No. No, we were not a funded organization, so we didn't have any reason to compete with them.
Was there any Vista projects that maybe?
No, our involvement was mainly addressing the education issues here in Fort Worth, employment issues, and how to improve the representation of Hispanics in governing boards, policy-making positions in the city of Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
And to that end, in May of 1979, as part of the organizational work of Image, we formed a leadership skills development training workshop, and invited many of the local Hispanics to participate so they can learn how an organization is governed, and to see how they might be able to be prepared to serve on boards and commissions in the city of Fort Worth to effect a greater change for the betterment of the Hispanics in Fort Worth. That was held in May of 1979, and it was sponsored by Image, and we had people such as Dr. David Hernandez discoursing on leadership skills, Lillian Copeland, who was with a very renowned PTA trainer for the Fort Worth area and for the state of Texas, I believe. And the Fort Worth Image Executive Board, we were all involved in that. And it was held at Lake Bridgeport at the Boy Scout Ranch, because I was a scoutmaster during that period of time, and I gained access to the facility. So we did a weekend training, and this is a certificate that we gave those that participated in that training. It was to prepare them to know how to behave in an organized meeting, and such as studying Robert's Rules of Order, and how to present yourself, presentation skills and things like that. I thought it would be very invaluable for future leaders of Fort Worth.
Were there any, community activists that grew out of that that were pretty prominent that you recall?
I don't. Well, let's see. Juan Rangel was in that group, and he later served as on the Fort Worth ISD Board of School Board. Okay. And he just retired a year ago, I guess, when he was defeated by Ms. Paz, who unseated him. But he was one of them. Ignacio Guerrero is another early activist in the area. We were co-founders of the Image Group here in Fort Worth. Humberto Martinez, another one. but they were all federal employees, and so their involvement was mainly, our involvement was mainly dealing with global issues rather than specific. We did some specific things too, but we're interested in job opportunities, training to prepare to, do well in committees, and by knowing techniques and practices of organized meeting procedures and so on.
Okay. I had a question in my head, but another one popped up. So, was the neighborhood improvement program ever introduced into Fort Worth?
Well, not in Fort Worth. There was a program in San Antonio called COPS, C-O-P-S, that was very viable there in San Antonio. We never could get that going here. We thought we could, but there was just not enough impetus to get it off the ground.
Okay.
But a lot of people became involved in their communities as a result of their involvement with our training and with image in particular.
So, what kind of, I guess, participation or what was involved in getting neighborhood development, like from federal dollars, into a community?
Well, we didn't bid for any, first of
Okay.
all. So if LULAC did, they might have done that here, because we were separate organizations, but with a general purpose of helping the Hispanics in Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we didn't compete for any funding at all, because ours was self-generated. Our interest was to help the community, but we didn't look for funding.
Okay. So, what kind of projects? You were on the board of the Action Agency.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of projects did you guys undertake?
Well, the neighborhood community centers that existed during that time, we ensured they had funding and good policies in place to use the Community Action Agency funds properly.
Were there any other sponsors for those community center programs, or was it just sort of, I guess, federal dollars doing that? Or
Well, there was the board, and the board had different parties that were interested in the implementation of the programs, but the programs were managed at the centers. There were center directors that managed those things, and we just did the oversight to ensure that everything was being done in accordance with the rules and regulations that govern the use of funds like that.
I see. Because there's a group that I'm kind of interested in learning more about called United Church Women, and they were involved a lot, from what I can tell, in South Texas and along the Gulf Coast, in implementing or building these neighborhood centers.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if maybe you've heard of that group before? Up here?
No, I have not.
Okay. So, was there any sort of cooperation in Dallas with any other similar organizations that you guys want to take on regionally?
There were several chapters of Image in the Texas area. We had one in Austin, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, and I think one in the Valley. I can't remember. It was. I can't think of them. Brownsville probably had a chapter. But we all had interest generally in the Hispanic issues that came up. We took part. In fact, we did take part in the redistricting of the voting here in the Tarrant County area. I was part of that. I did participate in that as well, as did other people in the Image group. We all helped in the redistricting of the voting boundaries, I think, for the school board and for the state electoral process.
Okay. On the school board level, who else was involved with that? Were there other organizations other than Image?
No, we were with the exception of Mr. Mendoza that I mentioned, Rufino Mendoza. He always had that lawsuit going against the Fort Worth ISD, and we were supportive of that. So we backed him up when we could.
Okay.
So we worked together jointly then.
I guess I would like to know more about on here. Where is it? Yeah. So you jointly fought for civil rights in the Fort Worth area with the Black community. What sort of organizations or what sort of activities or programs or what?
Well, in a global sense,
Mm-hmm.
we were supportive of some of the civil rights issues that came up during that time. Specifically, I don't recall any issues that we jointly worked on, but when there were, I think Reby Carey was in representing the Black community in the city council at that time, or the school board, I think it was.
Yeah.
So we were supportive of issues that he brought up, and went to the school board meetings and voiced our concerns about those things, which were similar to the Hispanic issues because it had to do with poor services, poor facilities in the Latino community and the Black community in Fort Worth.
Okay. But there weren't any like sort of, I guess, coalitions built across this
No, we
line?
would invite them to our annual meetings that we had,
Mm-hmm.
and got their input on things, but nothing specific that we worked on throughout the year. You know, it was just to make sure that we had a friendly, cooperative approach to problems in the community, so that we could share our interest to the people that were in power.
What about labor groups? Were labor groups, unions involved with any of the organizations you were part of?
No, we didn't have any union involvement in Fort Worth that I know of, unless it was with specific employers, you know. And the closest we got to was Carswell Air Force Base had a Hispanic organization there. I forget the exact name of it, but that lawsuit that was filed against Carswell was in support of their underrepresentation at Carswell Air Base, and not only underrepresentation but underemployment at the Air Force Base. So we met with the commander of the fighter wing there at Carswell, and it was a very big to-do. We were invited for a big social meeting with all the dignitaries there on the base, and our Hispanic image group showed up, and the board of directors, you know. Mm-hmm. And we had a very nice open meeting where we were freely discussing the concerns that we had and seeing what they could do in order to address the underemployment and the low employment situation at Carswell.
Okay. And how long did that take to get resolved? And did it get resolved? And
no, there was no immediate resolution. But those things take time because you've got people in. You can't just fire people and hire new people.
Right,
You've got to wait till retirements, and then affirmative action would be an issue that would be addressed, which we did talk about a lot, affirmative action, during that period of time. And mainly that it was a good term, but it wasn't implemented. We didn't feel it was implemented well in the Fort Worth ISD as well as Carswell Air Force Base. We addressed an issue like that with UT Austin as well. Arlington as well.
okay.
There was a professor there that was to be terminated, and I met with the university president there, and with a couple of members of my staff and of Image, and presented to him our concerns about, you know, you've got very little Hispanic employment. Why do you want to get rid of one of them? You know, why is it so bad that you have to get rid of this one? So fortunately, they kept that particular professor on board.
What about other groups like Mayo? Was it Maso student groups? But particularly Mayo was a big one. Mexican Youth Organization. Was there any sort of confrontation or
No,
crossing of paths?
no
with groups like that?
competition. But we did do is we sponsored scholarships for students that were going into college.
Mhm.
So we had people that were going to Tarrant County Junior College and UT Arlington that were the recipients of our scholarship awards.
Mhm.
We handed out scholarships every year for a period of years.
But like I guess politically like radical Chicano nationalist youth groups never sprouted.
We didn't have any involvement. There was not I think MASA was one of the groups. Is that right?
Possibly. I know MASO was Mexican American Student Organization, who they were, I guess, loosely affiliated with Mayo, who was loosely affiliated with Raza Unida, who was loosely affiliated with the Brown Berets. So like, yeah.
No, there was not confrontational issues with the education system. We were looking at the large picture of facilities and employment and opportunities for advancement.
Yeah, that's actually really unique at least from what I've read, in that there was always sort of tension and friction between these younger, sort of more confrontational type of political groups and, sort of, I guess, I don't want to say older, but I guess political groups that kind of took a different approach. There was always sort of a clash between, these two generations of activists.
We, understanding how the government, as government employees, we had our positions to be careful. We don't want to cross over into bad publicity for our federal agencies. That wouldn't look good for us, and it wouldn't look good for our agency. So we weren't into a lot of confrontation. We were into peaceful analysis and making recommendations for improvements here and there. The individual that I do remember that was very confrontational in involvement and was and I think he may have been associated with the UT students, radical students, was Jose Gonzales. Jose Gonzales was a very, very powerful community activist here many years ago. He went on to UTA, and I think if they offered a doctorate degree, he may have gone forward to do that. Jose Ángel Gutierrez was at UT at the time, and he and Jose Gonzales were involved with each other. Also, Ramses, I forget his last name now.
Muniz.
Muniz, yes.
Yeah.
How could I forget his name? And he was a very controversial figure in the state, and Jose Gonzales associated with him very much, as did Jose Ángel. But Image, we're more kind of a state organization. We're looking for peaceful resolution to things, using the system, understanding and using the system for our benefit.
Right. Because Vista, I know they got a huge grant from the Ford Foundation, but I believe they also did get some federal dollars. And Vista was a lot of volunteer groups were, not like that, not the way you describe your groups, So I guess, but if it really didn't exist much in Fort Worth, I mean, I guess there's not really much.
I don't recall that we had Vista groups in here. That was during the period, I think, of the Peace Corps too. So there was that general picture behind us, that people may have been participating in. But again, our interests were not with student groups, or it was issues that came up that we could impact on, like facilities and procedures and policies and things.
So you were in the Air Force, correct?
Yes.
When you got out, did you join the American GI Forum?
No, but I did attend their annual conferences to see what their issues were, and again, as a government employee, I didn't want to go into the confrontational areas that GI Forum would go into. So I backed out, and a lot of the Image people, had to be aware of their government jobs as well.
Right. So that brings up another thing. Were there Image people who were? I don't know if I've asked this, but were there Image people who were sort of affiliated with those groups? Like
There may have been, yeah.
But nothing publicly that you know.
Not in this area that I know of. There may have been some American GI Forum members. I think later on we had Raul Doporto, who was with the city HR commission Fort Worth Commission,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he was part of the American GI Forum. But issues were never brought to the Image Board for us to deal with from GI Forum. They had their own agenda that they pursued successfully in some cases. Yeah.
Let's see. So, I don't know too much about. Is there a statewide Human Relations Commission in Texas?
Yeah.
There is, right? And that didn't come about until in the 70s, right?
Jim Hale was the president of the State Human Relations Commission.
Okay.
Jim Hale.
And when did that come out?
Oh, we're talking years and years ago.
Really? Because I could have sworn, I thought in '69 there were groups still lobbying for it, but I could be mistaken.
Lobbying for it?
Yeah.
You mean
to establish one?
Oh, there was one established.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in '69 there had just been barely trying to get it.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know about Texas politics because I didn't
Right.
I didn't become active until 1974 after I came back from New Mexico, and then I started my activity with the civil rights issues in Texas.
And in '74 it was already established, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt.
And
You
again,
have
Jim
an
Hale
extra
is-
memory card in your bag?
No, I don't.
Any size?
No. All right.
How about on your camera?
Yes.
I'm desperate or I wouldn't be here. Thanks.
I have a bunch of photos on there though, so
Okay, yeah,
I don't know how what is
This is great.
28 or something?
32.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right. Train of thought.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the human rights.
Right. So,
Commission.
were there? I guess, were you involved in that?
Yes. Jim Hale was a fellow that we would contact regularly to see if he can help us out on larger issues
Okay.
that affected the state. I think he came out of Fort Worth, if I'm not mistaken, Jim Hale, and went up to Austin, or down to Austin, to serve as the chairman of the Human Rights Commission.
Okay. It's HALE, right?
HALE.
Okay. Is he still down there? Is he
I have no
still
idea. This
alive?
was
Is he-
years ago.
Yeah. Okay. So, what other, I guess, organizations or groups were you a part of that, or was there something that I didn't ask that maybe I should have about your involvement with the Action Agency and with Image?
No, I just feel like if there's, I was very much involved in the federal civil rights organizations because I worked with the Civil Rights Office.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, in 1977, again because of my involvement with Image, I became aware of the larger government picture and what other agencies there were and what types of jobs there were. So I left Social Security in 1977 to take a job with the HEW Civil Rights Office in Dallas. And because of that, I was more informed about civil rights law as an investigator, and I worked for about 15 years as a federal investigator for discrimination complaints. So that gave me a lot of ammo, if you would, to deal with local issues. When things came up on civil rights matters, I was an expert in that area, so I was able to help people.
Like, can you give us an example when something came up locally that you were able to?
Well, the professor at UT
Okay.
that was subject to.
Oh, so you were already
Being part-
working as a federal investigator by the time that had come up.
It was the transition there.
Okay.
I was with Image up until 1979 or so, and I can't remember. So it was earlier that we had the UT incident.
Okay.
But there were other people that came before the board's, Image board's attention, people that they felt discriminated in their workplace, and they came to us for assistance.
Mhm.
So we would guide them in how to deal with civil rights complaints, how to file them, the process that would be followed in order to address those, and investigations that would follow, and also settlement agreements that would be generated by by the organizations to try to resolve the issue before it went to a formal complaint. So knowing the system, we were able to counsel them very well.
What kind of employees were these? Were they just blue collar workers?
Yes, yes.
Or what sort of companies, or
Well, let's
what
see.
industry?
Private industry, so it was a EEOC that dealt with it. It was not a federal civil rights issue, but the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was one. There was a lady that I remember specifically that was a Spanish-speaking lady, and she was bewildered because they fired her from the job for testifying in a civil rights case, in that EEOC case in their employment. So they targeted her to fire her, and they did, and she appealed that and through a civil rights complaint through EEOC, and there really was no basis for them firing her without giving her an opportunity to find out what was going on. But that's how ruthless employment was back then.
Mm-hmm.
So she was able to settle that case, but she didn't regain her employment. So you trade off some of those things when you resolve a dispute. You give up something and you get something.
Mm-hmm.
So, but at least you got something, instead of nothing.
Yeah.
Other than just being shown the door and out you go.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I was going to ask about undocumented workers. Were any undocumented laborers ever?
No, we didn't handle any issues that came up that way.
Okay.
If I guess if maybe there were image organizations along the border that had more opportunities to deal with undocumented workers, but we didn't up here that I know of.
Okay.
During that time.
Okay. So there's just a lot of different places we can go. You have listed on here a number of organizations and experience in different sectors, from religious to public to military to private.
Yeah.
So, is there any one that you would like to talk about specifically?
Well, if the purpose of this interview is to determine how one influences situations for the betterment of Hispanics, yes, they all pertain to that.
Mm-hmm.
The Boy Scout movement, I dealt with mainly Hispanic Boy Scouts. So giving them early training on how to how to take leadership roles on and how to accomplish tasks and so on. I think that had a positive influence on the number of people that came through our troops. I was a Scoutmaster on and off for about 10 years, and I still continue to serve as an advisor in the troop committee for our church organization. So there's that influence, that positive influence. I think the successes that I experienced were definitely beneficial to my children, immediate children. To that point, I didn't know if you were interested, but my son went to Pasco High School, our son, Jeff Gonzales, and I think a lot of, when you have a good home, good leadership skills, you teach those to your children, right? So they benefit from it, and not only those skills, but their opportunities for advancement grow exponentially, as opposed to a home that doesn't have good leadership skills or a good educational background. So this is an example of how at least my son was affected mm-hmm. positively, as I hope other people's Hispanic children were affected because of their parents' involvement in the Image organization or other leadership training that we provided for the community. My involvement with the Federal Executive Board, I was a mediator, a trained mediator, so I was involved in resolving disputes with government employees in their federal settings. And eventually I went on to manage the Federal Executive Board's mediation program out of Dallas. And there was some recognition given to me at the time for my leadership of that committee, the Shared Neutrals program of the federal government in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I last worked for the Federal Aviation Administration, and I managed their mediation program for the FAA and in this entire region, where there were issues that came up with. There were Hispanic employees there too, that had issues, and when I sat in on mediations with them, they felt very comfortable that, hey, he understands where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully there were some positive results, from my participating as a mediator, or also training mediators on how to mediate, giving them skills and talents and practices that would enhance their opportunities. So I think the total picture is one of trying to be involved in programs that are beneficial not only to you but to the society around you.
Mm-hmm.
I felt all my experiences were to benefit other people, to help people resolve disputes, to help people gain employment, to help them that were ill-treated on the job or fired or threatened to be fired. And my civil rights background and my mediation knowledge was helpful to them as well over my career of 38 years in the federal sector.
I had another question that popped up. Was the Tarrant County Community Action Agency over Head Start? Did it manage the Head Start program in Fort Worth?
I'm not sure. It's been so many years, 1970 something, but there was, I think they list the organizations that were beneficiaries. And in fact, this talks about all the grants that were in the agency. If you'd like to review that. Yeah, Head Start is in there too.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So, in fact, you can keep the book if you want.
Really? Well, we're gonna have to probably keep it in the archive. I'll probably get copies from that because. Where was it at? Where was the? Were there multiple Head Starts?
Yeah, well, there were multiple facilities around the
Right,
city, and
right.
each had their own. They may have had their own Head Start program. I don't remember how it operated now, since it's been so many
yeah.
years.
Yeah, it says the different centers.
Yeah.
Around here. I'm gonna take a look through here and see what other.
That's Rhonda Doyle, the chairman of the commission.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard her name before, but I off the top of my head, I don't know much about her. Yeah, because there's a few organizations that I'm really interested in learning more about, or I guess federal anti-poverty efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And Head Start is one of them.
One area that that affected people across all racial and ethnic lines was my experience with the non-discrimination laws of the handicap.
Okay.
So I was one of the key spokesmen for the department in Dallas for the federal regulations.
ADA, right?
No, that was later, but initially it was the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. I came in 1977 and 80 through 80 to teach how to implement those federal guidelines so that people of any handicap would not be discriminated against.
Would you happen to know if there is like a central, I'm sure there is somewhere in Washington, but like a central collection archive or whatever of, booklets like this from counties all over the country? Would you have any?
No, I couldn't tell you that.
Okay.
But the government saves an awful lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you write a letter of under the Freedom of Information Act
Mm-hmm.
and direct it to a number of agencies, you'll be surprised what you get back.
Mm-hmm. Let's see how we're doing on time. Oh, yeah, we are kind of quite a bit over. It's okay. So is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we wrap up? Anything you wanted to mention? And I know there's a lot on there we didn't get to touch, so.
Oh yes, one more thing. It's not even on there, but my
Right.
my interest is in family history research.
Okay.
So my wife and I are consultants to do family, or teach people how to do family history research and write their family histories. So we're very, very big into that, and I think that's beneficial to the Hispanic community. In fact, it just triggered me in about the early 80s. I helped organize a Hispanic genealogy conference here in Fort Worth, and we had a lot of participants to that program from the Fort Worth area and Dallas. And one of the key things about doing family history research is that when people know where their roots are, they become more stable in their approach to life, and they see, because of family history stories, that yeah, there are ups and downs in everybody's life, but it's how you handle those things and the fact that you recover from those things that instills in an individual the feeling that we're going through a rough time, but our family always succeeds. So with that knowledge and that connectivity with ancestors and their experiences, it would provide more stability for an individual to be able to deal with life's crises. And I think there's a great benefit to the study of this family history. And there's an article that I saw. I think it was in the New York Times, if I'm not mistaken, showing the study that was done to some sociology group on the benefits of knowing your roots and how you're connected, and the confidence that it gives you in accomplishing great things, because you know you're going to succeed eventually, and that's very important, especially for kids that are in a poor area, and they don't have any family connection, so to speak. So they turn to gangs and violence as a way of life, as opposed to learning and benefiting from the history of their family, so that they know that they can get out of this mess at some point, because my grandfather and my great-grandfather did. Just as my great-grandfather Victor took his family out of Mexico in 1914-15 to provide for a better opportunity for his children and grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren and so on. And I am a beneficiary of that. If I don't know if my family would have existed during that revolution, because all the men were in the group, in the family, were of military age, so they were not conscripted, neither did they volunteer. As a result, my grandfather Ramon gave birth to my father, and my father gave birth to me. You know how that works. So family history roots are very important to give you, your family members, the confidence level that you need, and then with the knowledge that things can get rough in life, but it's cyclical. You don't have to be stuck in a downward turn.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for asking that. That was an area that I have dear concern in.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm retired, I devote a lot of time to family research.
Yeah, and it's important too for Hispanic families, because people from my generation, whose parents just got here in the 80s, they left everything behind, and so it's really hard to kind of make that connection to anybody before our parents, So yeah, I can imagine this being really helpful to a ton of people.
Well, if you'd like some help, I can certainly help you, because there's plenty of online resources now.
Mm-hmm.
Original records have been microfilmed by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and made available to the world.
Right, I heard about that.
FamilySearch.org.
Okay, I'd heard about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a free website. There's no subscription fees to that. You just start plugging in ancestors' names, and you get a ton of information back.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
I'm sorry we can't talk more. Otherwise, I totally would. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.